Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Fain, CEO of Center for Mentoring Excellence. We are here for episode 18 of our Thought Leader Conversations, which are monthly conversations with leaders in thinking in fields within or adjacent to mentoring. Without further ado, I want to introduce David Clutterbuck, who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give it anyway. David is one of the early pioneers of developmental coaching and mentoring and co-founder of the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. My notes say he's written more than 70 books, but I happen to know, I think we're closer to 80, right,
Correct.
David? Something like that, including the first evidence-based titles on coaching culture and team coaching. He's visiting professor at 4 business schools. He leads a global network of specialist mentoring and coaching training consultants, Coaching and Mentoring International, a wealth of knowledge. You'll appreciate his dry humor, I'm sure, as much as I do. And David, welcome. We're really excited to have you here.
It's a pleasure. So,
Wonderful. Well, I want to talk today about the intersection of coaching and mentoring, something that I know you've thought and written quite a bit about. Um, let's just start with kind of the fundamentals. How do you see the relationship between the two, and what do you see as the key differences and similarities?
so, coaching is like a sort of younger brother that's grown up to be a big beefy one, while the sister actually has been there in the background, but for a lot longer, and has been sidelined, but actually carries with her a whole lot more wisdom and insight. Um, and if you think that coaching as a word was only produced as a joke, in the 1850s. It was yeah, it was the idea was that you would students at Oxford and Cambridge University were transported through their exams because they spent their years before they took their final exams basically getting drunk and getting laid. That was what they did, and then they suddenly had to pass their exams. So they had an expensive tutor, and who transported them through their exams. And so the most expensive kind of open carriage, a kind of landau, was a coach. The word came from Hungarian. So there we are. We have coach, and coaching was a highly directive form of tutoring all the way up until Timothy Galway in the 1970s. So
Mhm.
went to India and found different ways of doing it. But mentoring throughout the over 3,000 years now has been a concept which is about the wisdom. And the original mentor was the goddess of wisdom, Athena. Um, and we see it reflected in the work in France, and the cleric Fenelon, who helped to solidify the first management book actually in the Western world.
Mm.
If you discount Machiavelli, who was a little bit before him. But this was about he also had this idea that you sit down with somebody to help them reflect and learn. And so the two things are reflective processes, developmental processes. Um, and they've come more and more together as coaches have adopted more mentoring style. And in fact, what we now know through the work of the Coach Maturity Research Group is that the more mature coaches are, the more like mentors they are. And that's a fascinating
Interesting.
development.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they
In
use
what
their
way?
well, they use their experience to craft better questions. They aren't afraid to tell stories and parable, because it's helped. And in fact, and they will very, very occasionally give somebody a piece of strong advice. Like if you do that, you're going to jail.
Mm.
According
Mm.
to the ICF rule book, you're not supposed to do that.
Right.
Let them go to jail or whatever. But obviously you don't do that. And if you think about it, as these are conversations that help people understand their inner world. Who am I? What am I? What are my aspirations, my fears, my strengths and weaknesses, and so forth? Really understanding yourself, becoming more self-aware, but also becoming more aware of the outer world.
Mm.
What's going on there? What are the opportunities for me? Who are my champions, and so forth. So what coaching and mentoring both do is link your better understanding of the internal world with a better understanding of the external world. So you can make better decisions, you can be more coherent about the way that you manage your life, and so forth. Coaches, because they tend not to have the experience to draw upon that's relevant to that individual, will focus more on the internal life.
Mm. Hmm.
Mentors are able to add more richness to this by adding because they've got real knowledge of the sphere of the typically they have more knowledge of the sphere of interest that the person is operating in. And so while that extra knowledge can be a two-edged sword, because if you start trying to create somebody in your own image, that's a real problem, or you feel compelled to share all of your experience, but that balance of helping the other person have the conversations they need to have with themselves. And it's this giving of context that mentors can do that coaches typically can't. And when you give context, you help somebody with the quality of their thinking. When you give somebody advice, you do the thinking for them. So
Hmm.
neither coaching nor mentoring really get into advice giving, except in extremis. Um, but it's that value of being able to give somebody some context because people don't always have all the answers inside them.
Yeah. I'm curious about how you see the role of reciprocity, David, because, this is a question I often get asked. We know that, one of the characteristics of a great mentoring relationship is this element of reciprocity. How does that fit in coaching?
Well, I think coaching doesn't typically have that element of co-learning.
Mm,
It's
mm,
typically a one-way learning relationship.
hmm hmm
It's not that you're teaching somebody something, but you're helping to draw out the learning they already have. Whereas with mentoring, you're creating new meaning, and in a way, that's where dialogue comes. Dialogue is different from debate or discussion because dialogue creates new meaning.
mm, mm, yeah. Um, How, what would, so in this community, there are quite a few folks who administer mentoring programs or design mentoring programs. How can mentoring programs integrate these coaching principles to enhance the development for mentors and for mentees?
Well, it's interesting that the EMCC standards, and we try and avoid competencies because there's a whole big debate about whether competencies are very helpful. Um,
Uh-huh.
but the standards actually say that a really effective mentor needs all the basic skills that a coach has, but they add to it this being able to use your experience wisely,
Mm,
um, and the ability to be a role model. Um, and these are things so there are additional skills or characteristics that you would not find um, typically in coaching.
yeah. Interesting. One of the things that you and I have talked about a few conversations ago is something that I think is happening as a trend in UK, maybe even all of Europe, that's not happening quite as much here in the States yet, but is this idea of mentors, paid mentors who are hanging out their shingle in a way that they're not here in the States. Can you talk a little bit about that trend and uh, I think it's something that sometimes folks here are trying to get their arms around, figure out how does that work when you're talking about this developmental relationship.
So we're talking about professional mentors, people yeah, yeah.
Hmm
So um, it really started in Poland about 15 years ago,
mm
first mentoring academy,
hmm
um, and um, what's happened as a strengthened since is that you've got people who are retiring. They've done mentoring internally within their organization. They want to be useful. They want to be valued for their experience, but they don't necessarily want to become consultants.
hmm
Um, and they don't want to become coaches because they see coaching as too limited and not valuing their experience.
Yeah.
So the idea that as a professional mentor, you'll be able to bring real value to particularly to small businesses or sometimes
hmm
larger businesses. But you're that wise person in the background who's able to ask those critical questions that make leaders think. And so, yes, there's a value to that. Now,
hmm
if you're talking at the other extreme, people working with I don't know, um, um, immigrants into a society and
hmm
helping them to basically feel that they're able to make their way in that society. You're not going to get paid mentors to do that, and it's not appropriate.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
but when you're dealing in a corporate environment where it's uh, uh, where you're really adding, you can see the added value that you're creating into a value creating organization, then it's a natural phenomenon, I think.
Mm, mm. And then how does one distinguish that mentor role from that coach role when you have a paid mentoring
Um,
relationship?
well, do you know, I don't think it actually matters.
Say more about that.
Well, when we've been we in our studies looking what at the coaches experience very mature coaches experience. What we've learned is that all of them say my clients don't really care what I call myself. Yeah.
Interesting.
What they want is somebody who has the skills of listening to me, and asking just those few pointed questions that stop them and make them think, oh, yes.
Mm,
Uh,
interesting. Yeah, we're too hung up, I guess, on the back end about what the definition is. It's about the outcome, is I think what I'm hearing you say, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So Sarah's asked a question in the chat, and I think I'm glad, Sarah, that you asked it because it really roots us or grounds us in this conversation. And she's asked, David, that you share your definition of mentoring. So maybe we can just
Uh,
back up a few thousand feet
yeah.
and share that definition.
Well, that's very simple. Mentoring is about using your wisdom to help somebody else become wiser. It's as simple as that.
Ah, excellent. Excellent. It's so that is probably the simplest and most general and yet in some ways crystal clear definition of mentoring. Okay, mine is a little different, Sarah, but it grows from what David says, right? So for me, when I think about the definition of mentoring, I think about a developmental relationship that shares that reciprocity, that co-creation, and that learning, which I think fits within David's definition, but is nowhere near um, as I don't know how to say it.
Succinct.
Wide, succinct. Yes, thank you. And the irony of that is not lost on me. Okay, um,
Right,
great question.
shall I just pick up on that issue?
Please,
Reciprocity.
yeah.
Reciprocity.
Well,
I can't even
yeah,
say it. That thing.
yes,
Yeah.
that one. Yes.
Um, some of the experiments we've been doing recently, last couple of years, have just wowed me. We call it reciprocal mentoring, because we're not that imaginative. But essentially, what we've been doing is putting people together from the very top of organizations and the very bottom, and particularly people from black and minority ethnic groups or whatever, but or transgender, whatever, but people from the bottom who are less privileged than people at the
Hmm.
top.
Hmm.
And we put them together in co-learning relationships with equal power, and we've given them the task of identifying systemic barriers to diversity and inclusion.
Beautiful.
Um, and then last week, about 10 days ago, I was with one of these in the health service. And what we do is to bring all of the pairs in the cohorts together to bring their experience and together from above and below design systemic approaches to address these hidden barriers across the organization. Um, and we spent a whole day just identifying using World Cafe type approaches. But we ended up with lots of practical things that addressed that were implementable from above and below that the whole organization could get around, not something just dropped down from above without really understanding, but
Mm.
something that was got right into the system, understood what was happening at a systemic level. I think this is the kind of application of mentoring that wows me, because we're using that shared wisdom, the shared experience. It's a co-learning. It is a relationship of equals, but we're changing the whole organization.
It's such a beautiful, beautiful construction. What is the instruction that you give the pairs when you send them on their way to um, have those discussions, initial discussions before you're gathering them?
Yeah. It's basically gather the your own lived experience
Hmm.
and the lived experience of other people around you.
With respect to the systemic barriers or just in general?
Which you just to just anything that
Mm.
that seems to be getting in the way. of people feeling that they belong, of equality, and so forth. So, for example, one of the things that came up, people with neurodivergence,
Hmm.
when they come to a promotion interview, how is the setup for that done? And the typical way you'd be, well, it's just a normal promotion interview. You just have a panel of people and you come in but that doesn't work.
Mm,
Somebody on the with some of the characteristics of autism, for example. Um, so how do you actually make it um, um, an environment where that person can shine?
yeah.
Just a simple example, but we're full of loads of things like this, and you say, okay, it doesn't take much
No.
to change things.
Yeah, it's centering the issue. It's creating this imperative and creating this sense of agency. And I bet you anything, I don't know if it's too soon to report on this or if you've seen it yet, but I bet you the ripple effects of those conversations on the behavior of the senior individual in those is enormous throughout the organization, just in the way that they lead.
Absolutely. Well, my favorite example of this is somebody from in a large company based in the UK, um, and he was from of Indian background, but I think he must have come as a child into England, but he was very, very anglicized. Um, but he had six children, three boys and three girls. And he was paired up in this with um, a young woman in her late 20s, a young black junior manager, very, very intelligent, very driven. Um, and he said, in our conversations, it came out that and he said, well, what's the what is the big barrier for somebody like you in this organization? And she says, when you're a woman, nobody listens to you. And when you're a black woman, even fewer people listen to you.
Hmm.
And he was so shocked by that because he realized when he went home that he spent all his time listening to his sons, but never spent any quality time listening to his daughters.
Mm.
And he told me that, my my family dynamics have been dramatically changed by that simple insight.
What a beautiful ripple effect, right? I mean, it's not just the professional implications, it's the personal implications, and just having taken that space in one context to talk about those things. I'm struck by your term, you calling it reciprocal mentoring. It's such a challenge to figure out what to call this. Some people call it reverse mentoring, which is not a term that I love. We tend to call it complementary mentoring. But the idea of one of the things that I love about that setup is it is true reciprocity. I mean, you have the most junior person who has not just a place to talk about what their experience is, but the benefit of the exposure
Yeah,
to senior folks. You have this idea of, learning in the interest of the community, whether it's a larger organization, and then, of course, bringing people together in that formal and structured way to learn from each other and co-create something new is really, really exciting. So that's a great example. Thanks for that.
we've actually got a good practice guide. So if anybody wants to produce one of these, to put one of these programs in place,
Mm.
um, just let Lisa know, and we can make sure that you get a copy of the. It's an ebook, so we could or an e-document,
Oh, great.
so we
Thank
can
you
we
very
can
much.
share that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do if you're watching this, be in touch with us, and we'll make sure that reaches you. So thanks for that offer. Um, okay, let's talk about this term developmental coaching. What is that, and how does that approach affect mentoring relationships?
So I think that we can define two different types of mentoring and two different types of coaching, if you like. There's traditional coaching, which is very directive, and developmental coaching, which tends to be the opposite, to be, or at least attempt to be non-directive. In
Mhm.
reality, it's a bit of a myth because every time you decide what question you're going to ask, you've just directed the conversation. Um, so yeah, but it tends towards trying to not to interfere.
Mhm.
Um, and you've got what we might call sponsorship mentoring, where the mentoring and sponsorship are pulled together into one relationship. And then you've got developmental mentoring, but they're very clearly not part of the same thing. And we now know from a number of bits of evidence that actually mentoring becomes much less effective when you mix it up with sponsoring, because you introduce some power dynamics into the relationship, which actually undermine the quality of the learning.
Mm, mm. Yeah,
Um,
not surprising, right? I mean, 'cause I feel like as a mentee, let me say it this way, as a protege, and I'm using that term in relation to sponsor just for the purpose of this conversation. Showing up for your sponsor, you want to show up as the person that that sponsor wants to hitch their wagon to, right? You want to show up as the star. But for your mentor, you can use that as a developmental conversation and show up with so many of your shortcomings and really work on that together. Is that what you're talking about? Or
absolutely
yeah.
so. Yeah. I mean, and you can see this beautifully at work. I've just this today I was doing a module for mentors in a program for aspiring HR directors,
Mm,
or vice presidents HR, um, and we're linking these HR these very senior HR people with very experienced with more junior people who are 2 or 3 years away from becoming a VP HR. Um, is VP the right term? I don't know, but
yeah,
head of
yeah,
HR in the
yeah. Oh,
end.
yeah. Chief Human Resources Officer, usually CH or Chief People Officer is how we usually refer to it here, but same
That
idea.
would,
Yep.
yeah. And it's we've now today's session was launching the 12th cohort in 6 years.
Wow.
So it's been incredibly effective.
Hmm.
The majority of these people have got promoted into much more senior roles.
Cool. What's been the secret?
I think the secret is um, a lot of effort in the selection of
Hmm.
people.
Yep.
The number, I mean, so we only have 15 people per cohort, or 15 pairs per cohort. And so you get a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of competition to get in on it, but people are going to make, if people have gone that far, they've got to be keen to do it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so I think that's one of the factors. Um, and the quality of the mentees, the quality of the mentors is and we've seen that issue played out in other scenarios as well. I remember one particular study of people coming out of jail. Um, and in the pilot programs, where you would have spend a lot of time selecting the part that both all the participants, the rate of recidivism was very, very low. We're talking of 5 to 10%.
Mm.
Um, but once it got rolled out into much bigger programs with less attention and much more attention to the quality and more attention to numbers, recidivism went up to over 60%.
Whoa. Wow. Wow. Um, and what is there a specific thing to which you attribute that difference?
I think it's just that people, once you spread it out and people aren't committed to it, either mentors or mentees,
Hmm. Hmm.
you don't get the quality of the relationship, and the quality of the relationship is fundamental.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Catherine asked a really good question, and Catherine, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself because I want to make sure that I'm understanding the context of your question, and I think it may have been a minute or so ago. So Catherine asks, isn't it the same effect when the mentor is paid? Catherine, if you don't mind unmuting yourself and just bringing us back to what was the root of your question, that will help us answer it.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
My question was about mentoring and sponsorship that
Yeah.
has less benefits than mentoring alone. And my question was about isn't it the same effect when the mentor is paid? Because it becomes like transactional because
In potential, I think the distinction I would make is that paid mentoring is much less effective if it's in um, um, start again. Paid mentoring really works when you're dealing with entrepreneurs and at that very top level. Um, it doesn't seem to have much of a positive track record when you get down below that. So in enormous people within an organization or a professional association, for example, it's pretty rare for them to be paid, and I'm not aware of any examples of really effective programs that where people are paid when it's at that level.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Sometimes a question that I get asked just on this topic of paid mentors, David, is organizationally, because as you know, I think as you know, we work mostly with organizations helping them set up mentoring initiatives, is how do they incentivize their mentors? Often there's a dearth of mentors, or people are at a place where they're talking about the, important versus the urgent, or the urgent versus the,
Yeah.
the tyranny of the urgent, or what have you. So they ask me this question, and I'm curious your response to it. And the question is, should we provide financial incentives for our folks internally to mentor other people? What's your response and your thoughts to that?
I personally, I would say no. I
Mm,
don't think that's necessary.
mm,
Um, um, it's because I think people within the organization have a responsibility for developing the talent around them.
yeah.
Some organizations where you can't get promoted yourself if you haven't developed some other people so that they could move into the same level that you're at now. And that doesn't necessarily mean your direct reports. It
Hmm.
means anybody within the organization. So there's a big incentive to be a mentor. Other organizations have set up a developers club. So the mentors get invited once every 6 months to a meeting with the head of HR and the chief executive or president to talk about people strategy and put their input into that. And it's it's a gathering where
Love that.
yeah, it's so simple, isn't it? But it makes you feel valued.
That's genius. That's terrific. It's very simple, and it's a great way to recognize it. One of the models that I've seen that I love and I often encourage is, if it has to be linked in order for mentoring, in order to really create a mentoring culture, you have to have a learning culture, because without learning, you don't have anything. And so if you really want to incentivize people, is require your people to show, and I think it's most effective at the most senior levels of an organization, require your people to show at each performance evaluation period that they have invested in their own learning, and they have invested in the learning of the people whom they supervise, and have that be a demonstration of the leadership competency of
Yes.
uh, of mentoring. I know you don't love the word competency. What did you say? Leadership standard of learning. But I'm curious what your thoughts are about that, and how, whether you see that being effective.
Oh, absolutely. I think, well, give you an example. A company we worked with some years ago. They wanted to grow fast organically, and it wasn't happening because their line managers were just basically just doing everybody else's job for them.
Hmm.
So they changed the bonus system. So half of their bonus depended upon how much of their job role they managed to give away, and
Interesting.
they had to develop their staff to do it.
Yeah.
And that was a great way of doing it. Some of our current research and experimentation is turning the whole performance management thing on its head.
Say more.
So we call them BOW teams, business evolving as usual. Um, and one of the characteristics of these is that you take the responsibility for performance management away from the line manager and give it to the employee themselves. So every 8 weeks, they go out to their stakeholders, their colleagues, their clients, internal clients, and so forth. But they gather um, information that's about basically what could I do better and what learning would be useful for me.
Mm,
And they put all that together and they bring that back to their line manager, who coaches them on how they're going to do this. Maybe challenges them so they could do more. But
hmm.
basically, the leader becomes a curator of the learning in the team. And then every 3 or 6 months or whatever, all of those learning plans cumulatively come together in a team learning plan. So the team as a whole looks at how we're going to support each other's learning.
Hmm.
How we, and what do we collectively have to improve in? or learn in order to achieve the business objectives that we have. So you've got this business, this personal development plan, then you've got the team development plan, and then you've got the business plan, and they're all linked. And in most organizations, they're not, but under a bow team, they are.
I love that. I love that. What a great way to have it ripple throughout the organization, and really for people to see that it's been a valuable investment of time and resources and the like. Okay, as I suspected we would, I have veered from my list of questions, which is exactly as I knew and had hoped would happen. But I want to make sure to ask about a couple things that I know folks are curious about, and also want to remind people to please add your questions and your comments in the chat. It really does enrich our time together as well. I wanted just to ask you, David, about some of the practical applications of coaching and mentoring. Especially, there are some tools of the trade, tricks of the trade that I think coaches have that mentors could benefit from. And I'm wondering if any come to mind as you think about what coaching skills could mentors employ to really enhance their practice of mentoring.
So there's quite a few books of tools and techniques for coaching now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they're all full of very useful things. Some of them are full of some very unuseful things as well. But on the whole, there's techniques there which you can apply if it's appropriate, and that's the key thing. Is it more appropriate to apply a technique, or is it more appropriate to have a dialogue? And
Talk about that distinction, because I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's obvious to everybody.
Okay, so if well, let me give an illustration of something that this week which actually combined the two.
Okay.
So this was in a coach supervision session, but it's the same principle. So the coach is saying, look, actually, I'm not really sure what my issue is, but I know there's lots of things going on here. So, but I can't put them all together into a question or an issue that I want to bring. So okay, So I said just write down one word, and he said I like doing it with post-its. So in each post-it we put down one word or one phrase, and we just plop these all over the table. And so we've got a sort of constellation here. And when we've done that, we just sort of both got up and walked around it, and then simply said, okay, so what are the connections that you see? Or what do you see about the pattern in front of you?
Mm.
And immediately he was puzzled, and I said, well, what strikes me is the connection. What's in the middle? What's the connection between the things that have gravitated to the middle of this, even though you hadn't not thought about placing them anywhere particular? And immediately he could see that actually everything else linked to two or three things within that had somehow gone into the center.
Mm.
And then we started looking at connections between connections. And slowly we started to unravel this ball of wool, if you like, until he realized exactly what the question was that he needed to ask himself. And it's such a simple approach, and it requires you holding back and not trying to direct or get into it, simply prodding and asking what connections you see here, reflecting back. But it's having all the issues in front of you. So that's I don't know, standard coaching technique. I think it's probably not for basic coaches, but more advanced coaches would use something like that. Some of the other tools and techniques which actually come from mentoring have been adopted in coaching, which I find quite a few. So separate selves is one of those.
Yeah,
So
I'm familiar with that, but I'm not sure everyone watching is. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So separate selves is where somebody's not can't make their mind up at something. They've got conflicting values in their head. So you ask them to take their persona. Let's say your risk averse self versus your adventurous self. So you get them to talk about it from the perspective of their risk averse self, and then you might get them to change chairs so they're in a different place and talk about it with their adventurous self. And then you say, so which of those two selves do you emotionally immediately feel much more drawn to? And 99% of the time, people know which one they're going to go with.
Mm, mm. I love that. You know, it reminds me of the quote by Wayne Dyer, which is when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. It's
Mm.
just, such an important matter of perspective. And actually, as something as simple as shifting your place in a room, um, or wearing a different hat or putting on a different persona, um, just makes it's simple, but it's also profound. Uh, Makes a big difference. So great example. Um, so we are in this world right now where AI is means so many things. And I'm curious your thoughts about how you see the future of coaching and mentoring evolving with the future uh, through the future of AI.
Well, I think this is a great divider between coaching and or basic coaching and mentoring.
Hmm.
Because what we might call grow model coaching, I suspect everybody's familiar with the grow model. Get rich on waffle, we sometimes say, but Girls'
Yeah,
reality. It's whatever the rest.
yeah,
Rest. Um,
yeah.
but that level, where you're going through a process, which basic level coaching is,
Hmm.
the AI can already do it better than a human. The AI can fake empathy better than a human. Um, so if you are working at that level, you're already obsolete, even though you don't know it.
Mm, mm,
And because the AIs are getting better and better, they're accumulating more and more questions. And the AI can also, in some of the current iterations, it can monitor your voice tone to look at what so to actually estimate what's going on in your head, the emotions that you're feeling.
mm,
So there's so many ways in which the AI at that basic level can basically look into its library of questions and select the one that's going to be probably the one that might be most helpful for somebody. It
hmm.
works at the at the base level of complexity. The more complex the situation, the more it needs human judgment. Now, AI can't do judgment and probably never will. It can do statistical analysis, but that's not the same thing.
Mm, yeah,
And
powerful.
and and AI doesn't think the well, it doesn't think anyway, but the way that the that AI um, comes to a conclusion on things is by lots and lots of digital calculations. It's a two or three dimensional thought. Humans have the dimensions of human thinking are up to 15, but I think they've measured up to 15 dimensions. Don't ask me what that means. I have no idea. But anyway, that's what the scientists tell us. But when we have a thought, it's a flash of firing of neurons in multiple dimensions. Um, and what the particular aspect that a computer can't do is it's episodic. We think we have memories of things and it links those memories. And the linking of those memories enables us to see things to be intuitive, to be inventive, and so forth. So it's our humanity and it's our history, our internal narrative that enables to be effective. So the higher up the levels of complexity that we go in how we interface with other people, the more effective, the more we're immune from the ravages of AI.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's interesting. As you're speaking, I'm processing my own thoughts as well. And I'm wondering, this idea of being listened to and having space held, one of holding space, AI can process a response, but can AI really hold space for possibility? I don't know the answer to that question. My initial guess is probably not yet, but I don't know how you do that without the human interaction.
oh, they've already been looking at some of this, and it's
Mm,
and some of these coach platforms, but they've been recording coaching sessions. Yeah, and you can what you can do in this is you can see, well, when a coach asks a question and it seems to have an impact, how many seconds do they wait quietly before they say anything? you know, things like that. So pauses and so
Yeah,
forth. There's a lot that AI can do from just by a mechanical extrapolation.
yeah, yeah.
But I
It's
think, but leave aside AI. Think
yeah,
about virtual reality.
yeah.
And I don't know how many people have. So how many people have actually experimented with coaching or mentoring in virtual reality?
Yeah, if you have either unmute yourself or share in the chat if you have experienced with coaching or mentoring in virtual reality. You know, so for those who don't know, virtual reality, and correct me, David, if I'm wrong in this characterization, but virtual reality is something that is live, but it's live in the other world, meaning you have avatars that are interacting with one another at the direction of humans on the back end, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
There's wonderful things you can do with that. You know, you and your mentee can swap bodies, so they can look at themselves through your eyes, giving a speech, for example.
Mm.
Uh, you can use constellations, and you can move. You can physically move, or virtually physically move into each part, each element of that constellation. I think one of the most weird things I did was a mentoring session sitting on the edge of a tilted up birthday cake, giant birthday cake, floating above the Amazon. Um, I don't know quite how we got there, but it was certainly
Sounds
a
like I like your I get ayahuasca was involved or something like that.
yes.
Yeah,
Um, it's so I think we it's where we bring our humanity, our wisdom, our knowledge.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
then there are three levels of wisdom. So there's the very basic level, which is sort of technical wisdom. So skinny wisdom, we would call it. So that's being an expert on a topic. AI can do that.
Hmm.
There's broad wisdom, which comes from our experience of life, both our own and vicarious and so forth. And there's meta wisdom, which is about putting together um, bodies of experience and disciplines and things, but putting together things together that would never normally have gone together,
Mm, mm.
and creating new things.
Yeah, I love that. I like the idea of the kind of augmentation of reality to help humans think. So Sarah made a comment about that, and then I want to get to Catherine's question, which is, I think, an important and a fundamental one as well. So as to the topic of AI, Sarah says, I've used an AI coach before and found it very, very unfulfilling. The amount of input needed and questions without context was frustrating. And the actual coaching delivered, questions asked and so forth, was not strong compared to the interactions I've had with a human coach. Insightful and interesting, Sarah. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that. Catherine asked a question, and I think what I'd like to do, David, is to have you answer that, and then we'll do our giveaway because it's a great way to wrap us up. Catherine says, I'm based in Canada. Coaching has been really popular in workplaces over the past few years, and budgets are often allocated for it. On the other hand, while mentorship is frequently talked about, it still tends to be seen as a nice to have, something that's often hard to fund. Do you have any insights or ideas on how mentorship could be perceived as less of a nice to have? Great question, Catherine, and one I've seen uh, uh, several times. So appreciate you bringing that up. David, your thoughts?
In one way, it's very simple. If it's not tied to a specific business objective, it ain't going to thrive. Um, and what we can see is we looking at the cost of not having mentoring. So we know that from a number of studies that people who have a mentor are a third more likely to stay over any given period of time. So there's a real retention issue there
Mhm.
that you can clarify what is worth money in return to work mentoring for mums and now increasingly dads. Yeah. Now I know mums sort of have the baby and the next morning they're back behind the desk in the States, but or something.
Relatively speaking, I think relative to what's happening in the rest of the world, I think that that's true. Yes.
But return to work mentoring has a very clear. People are much more likely to come back to the same job. They hit the ground running because running more easily, and they're more likely to stay longer in that job. So I think tying it to very specific outcomes that you want to see.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's also great data out there, Catherine, about the ripple effect of mentoring. And it's interesting because I admittedly I'm quite biased towards the ripple effect of mentoring as opposed to the ripple effect of coaching, although I'm a big fan of coaching as well. it is because of the reciprocal nature of mentoring, and because there's lots of studies that show that the impact on the quality of the leadership of mentors really is significant. You can make an argument, and I think a very well-based, well-founded argument, that an investment in mentoring is something that will have a ripple effect and is much more scalable than coaching on a large scale level. And the investment is relatively minimal. I see Sarah saying that most mentoring initiatives are not funded. That's true because most mentoring initiatives are still what I call pair and pray, which is pairing people and just sort of praying that it
Yeah,
succeeds
study
without
work.
the
Yeah.
competency building. But if you have that competency building and that measurement, and you invest in that, it's really amazing. I know there are several folks on the call whose organizations I've worked with who have seen this happen within the organization. So if you have a success story, you can put that in the chat if you'd like to. But if there is evidence and there are studies that support that, and if you need some help finding those, I'm happy to help point you in the right direction as well. So okay, Justina has a. Oh, go ahead.
I was, I was going to say one of the other factors that we found that's not normally appreciated is if you want to create a coaching culture, if you want your line managers to coach people,
Yep.
um, typically there's all sorts of things that get in the way. But if you train them to be a mentor first, they can practice on other people's direct reports. So if they screw it up, it's and
That's right. That's good. That's true. The personal consequences may seem a little bit, yeah. It's also, it can be very helpful when you're starting to solicit input from who has been a good mentor in your organization on an informal basis. You will see that people know, and that can often be a really good place to start to build that business case for mentoring within your organization.
Um, when I was preparing for a strategic meeting with management, I asked AI to generate questions that would help me navigate the topic, and the questions are incredible. It can work.
Mhm.
It can be very useful. I did I did uh, I did ask ChatGPT just to be whimsical. So what would it take for you to switch yourself off?
And what did our friend chat say to you in response, David?
Well, it gave me a long description of how it was designed and all the rest of it. And then at the end of it, it said, "Have you been having suicidal thoughts?"
Ooh. Interesting. Interesting. One of the best uses in the mentoring context that I know of for AI came from somebody who I coach, interestingly, not mentor, and what they said is they have used AI to say, an issue I want to talk to my mentor about is X. Let's make it up for the sake, is how to be better at influencing others. What are 5 questions I can ask my mentor to help them help me in this way? And I love that as an augment, as a to be
Mm.
generative of dialogue, as opposed to um, stifling it or and really to supplement the mentoring relationship.
I
Um,
love.
it's great, right? It's great to use it as a prompt to further thought and to open dialogue. There's so much more we could talk about, David. I mean, um, we how much time everybody got? We have 3 or 4 more hours. Um, uh, David's been prolific in terms of his books. There have been great resources to me in my own practice in the mentoring world, and I know to so many others, both on this call and not. So please do take advantage of that. David, thank you so very much for this
Pleasure.
incredibly generative conversation. I've been taking copious notes. I will be watching the recording myself so that I can gather this wisdom again. Um, in a minute, you'll see how to get in touch with David. I want to just make an announcement that our next Thought Leader conversation is on April 15th at 11 a.m. Pacific time here in the US and 2 o'clock Eastern time with Javier Pena, who is going to talk about harmony in mentoring. Javier is a musician and a conductor and has used his leadership and scholarship and life experience in a way that helps think about harmony. Here it is. To get in touch with David, you can see on the screen and with us here. David, any parting words for the kind folks who joined us today?
Well, one of the things that I try a new skill every year, and one of the skills I learned was improv comedy. And I realized that actually coaching and mentoring, when they're done well, are pretty close to improv.
Mm. Absolutely. We actually have a member of our team who is in improv, and this concept of yes and in
Yes.
improv, which is, you never, if you ever watch improv comedy, they never say no on the screen, right? They always say yes and. It is really generative, and I think has been particularly useful as well. So, thank you for the generosity of your time and the generosity of your wisdom and all of the great work you've done in this space. Thank you to everybody for joining us. We hope to see you on April 15th, tax day here in the US. And we'll look forward to seeing you then.